Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am bringing you week 17 of my 2019 reads. This week was another great reading week. I read a couple more poetry collections and a few other books. The first poetry book that I finished this week was Finding Baba Yaga by Jane Yolen, which is a book that I'd heard about from Maija at Maija Reads, who I will link below. And this is interesting. It's not a collection of poems, but rather is a novella told in verse, a story about a teenage girl who is rebellious and leaves a very strict family to go out and be on her own. And she ends up finding Baba Yaga and kind of developing into an own strong person. This reminds me a little bit of The Poet X, which I had read earlier this year and really loved, in that it's a story told in verse about a girl who feels rebellious against strict parents and sort of finds her own voice. However, this story is very much a fairy tale. It's set in sort of this modern day, but it has so many fairy tale aspects, and the feel of the verse is very fairy tale-like, and I loved that. I love fairy tales. I love the feel of fairy tales. I love this rhythm that the verses had. I was totally into this book. It may not have been poetry in the sense of, sonnets or something like that, but the rhythm was there, the structure was there, and it was so easy for me to just devour this entire story. I absolutely loved it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book of poetry that I finished was Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith, and this is a collection of poems. I think maybe I heard about it first from Rachel at Kalanadi, who I will link below, but I think maybe other people have also mentioned it. Tracy K. Smith is the Poet Laureate of the United States, and this collection has won, I think, the Pulitzer Prize. So it is sort of a well-known author and a well-known collection of poems. I thought that the themes in this poetry book were really interesting. It focuses a lot on sort of life, the universe, and everything. It looks at the awesome power of maybe God, of maybe whatever runs the universe. It looks at also the issues of humanity, the frailties and faults and pettiness of humanity. So I thought that the themes that this collection explored were really interesting. I also really enjoyed the kind of metaphors and analogies and ways that Smith connected everyday experiences to bigger things and connected bigger things to everyday experiences. I thought that there was a lot of imagery involved in this poetry collection, which I found very strong. However, and this is a criticism that I keep having of different modern poetry, I struggled with finding the rhythm, finding the structure, finding the flow of the poems. It felt like everything was arranged so strangely. The breaks in between words were not where I expected them. I just couldn't find my way into the poems, if that makes sense. I was reading it almost more like, I don't know, abstract stories. And as such, it was good, but it just didn't grip me in the way that I look for poetry to grip me. I couldn't get into the movement of the poems. So for me, this collection was 3.5 out of 5 stars. But I do think, like I've said for some previous collections as well, if you're a more advanced poetry reader than I am, this might work better for you. So give it a try. It's very well regarded by a lot of people, and I did find the themes very accessible and the imagery really strong. Next, I finished a Western historical romance called Forbidden by Beverly Jenkins. And this is a story that I think I heard about from Tatiana at Musical Tati, who I will link below. And I was so glad to read it this week. It was such a de-stressor. I love falling into romance novels, but I was kind of saving this for one of those rainy day moods. So it was very, very perfect. It's a very sweet story. Sometimes romance novels can get a little angsty, but this one actually had such healthy, sweet relationships for the most part, and centered instead around a plotline that was much more deep on social issues. So it still had a lot of the traditional romance tropes. You know, you have this strong, handsome, rich, powerful man who falls in love with a kind of poor but very hardworking and ethical and plucky woman. So that part was stereotypical, but the plot line was so interesting. The hero is basically half black, half white, but passes as white. And this is really important for him because he used to be a slave, and now he, after the Civil War, has moved out west, and he has created a new life for himself where he has prestige and power and money. And there's still a lot of very difficult race relations. This is set in the late 1800s, when a black woman moves into his town that he falls in love with, and he has to decide, what does he do? Because at that point, you know, you couldn't marry somebody who was of a different race from you. So for love, does he give up this social status that he has created for himself by passing as white? Or does he give up this relationship that he's forming with this woman because he wants to maintain that? And so it's just a lot of really interesting dynamics there, a lot of good questions. So I found that this romance story actually had a lot of very nice plot lines, which isn't always the case with romance novels, while still being a very sweet love story. So I recommend it, actually, if you're interested in Western romances. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I finished Histoire de Babar by Jean de Brunhoff, which is a children's book in French, also known as The Story of Babar, the elephant. And this is a book that my friend Josh picked up for me as a souvenir when he was in Belgium the other week for vacation. So thank you, Josh. It was a super cute little book. It's written maybe for kindergarten age children, which was right exactly at my level of French. So it was perfect. And it's a super cute little story. You've probably heard of Babar the elephant before. Basically, there's a little elephant whose mother is shot by a hunter, and he runs away and ends up going to a city where a rich old lady sort of adopts him, and he ends up exploring city life, getting a suit made out of green cloth and, you know, riding elevators, driving around in a car, these sorts of things. So there were a lot of very cute, very absurd parts of this story that made me laugh. I thought it was very silly and adorable. So I really enjoyed the reading experience of it. I will say that, you know, this was written in the 30s, and its age shows in some of the colonialism themes and issues of, you know, sort of civilization versus you know, people who live in the wilderness. Like a lot of, maybe if you read this, don't examine the themes too deeply because it's very problematic. But if you read it on the surface, it's quite a sweet story, and I enjoyed that experience of reading it in French. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars as a non-critical reader of a small children's book. So that wraps up week 17 for me. I hope that everyone else had a great reading week as well. If you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear what you thought of them. I also want to apologize. I think the lighting has been getting brighter and darker. These trees behind me, if the light hits them, the camera thinks that it doesn't need to light up my face anymore. So that's been shifting throughout the video. Sorry about that. Also, there was one other thing I wanted to share before I ended this video, which is that I was mildly inspired by Rachel at Kalanadi, who I've already linked below, her video the other week where she shared some of her crochet projects, which I think she works on while she listens to audiobooks. So I thought I would share one of my art projects. Over Easter, which I don't really celebrate exactly except for art projects, I made a Ukrainian-style Easter egg. And I make these each year for the past couple of years. They're a lot of fun. They take a lot of time. And this year, Sush read to me from the Wheel of Time while I did it. So it was sort of a book art project. And I was happy with how it turned out, so I thought I would share. So this is my egg. I was a little inspired by the sort of like Delft blue porcelain. just in terms of kind of the colors and the flowers and everything like that. So it was a lot of fun making this. And just as an example, a previous year I did maybe a more traditional Ukrainian design for some of the, I don't know, the themes on this one. So this is just what they look like. I think that these eggs are so much fun to make. They take something on the order of 5 to 10 hours, just depending on how complicated you make it. I will leave some links below for how to do these eggs. If anybody is interested, you can get a kit for, I don't know, $30 online on Amazon, and it gives you the stylus and everything that you need in order to do these. There's sort of a wax-based egg where you draw on in wax and then you dip it in the color, and then you draw on more in wax and dip it in color again. So I just wanted to share these. I think they're a lot of fun. I had fun making mine this year. If anybody else is doing fun art projects or did something cool for Easter, please also share that below. I really like those too. Okay, that's it finally. And I will see you guys next week.